Throughout Europe's history, there has been a steady stream of leaders who sought to dominate and unite Europe through war. All failed. Today, European integration has been achieved and peace reigns on the continent, save for the smoldering conflict on Europe's periphery in Ukraine. The integration and peace arose after centuries of warfare through cooperation rather than domination. The basis for this peace is a political and economic integration of Europe through the European Union. Most importantly, the two preeminent nations of Europe, France and Germany, quit fighting and instead chose the path of cooperation. Today, we will take a look at this transformation.
In 1870, the Franco-Prussian War began. The war was instigated by the Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck as a way of finally achieving a unified German state by rallying the other German states in a war against France. As you can see, Germany at this time was a patchwork of different states such as Saxony, Hanover, Bavaria, and Prussia. This would be the first of 3 wars between the two nations which would tear Europe apart. Prussia won and unified the various German states to become Germany as we know it.
In the aftermath of its victory, Prussia made France give it the lands of Alsace and Lorraine and pay a large war indemnity. This seizure of French lands went against the thinking of the German Chancellor. He correctly saw that the taking of these lands would mean that France would forever be hostile towards the new Germany, biding its time for revenge. However, he was overruled by the army generals who deemed the lands necessary for Germany's safety. As foreseen by Bismarck, the seizure of lands proved to be a sticking point for future relations, as France was determined to regain its lost lands, and Germany was convinced that France was a mortal enemy.
France, bitter at defeat and the loss of lands, bided its time for revenge. It spent the next 44 years preparing for war. It expanded and modernized its armies, gathered allies like Tsarist Russia and Great Britain, and spent inordinate amounts of money preparing for the next conflict. Germany did the same, cozying up to Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. In 1914, the French chance for revenge came with the advent of World War I. Germany aimed a knockout blow against the French, but the French did not fall. Instead, the war quickly turned into trench warfare where thousands of lives would be expended for the most minuscule of gains. The war raged on for 4 years, resulting in around 20 million dead, countless numbers of wounded soldiers, and the equivalent of trillions of Korean won spent to finance the war.
In the aftermath, a peace was imposed on Germany. The lands it had seized from France in 1870 were returned to France, and it was now forced to pay war reparations as the entirety of the war was placed squarely on Germany's shoulders. The peace wasn't lenient enough to ensure good relations, nor harsh enough to keep Germany forever weakened. One French general, after seeing the peace treaty at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, commented that this was no peace, but only a truce for 20 years. Now, it was Germany's turn to bide its time for retribution.
Sure enough, 20 years later, World War II began. This war was even more destructive than the first. France was quickly knocked out and it found itself under German occupation. A staggering 70 to 85 million soldiers and civilians died. After this war, both Germany and France were exhausted. 3 wars and less than 70 years will do that to a country. Only then did the two stop imposing draconian peace treaties and war indemnities on each other and instead put aside their differences.
Following the Second World War, the two began to work together to create the European Coal and Steel Community to promote trade and economic cooperation. This eventually evolved into the European Union in 1992 following the collapse of the Soviet Union and its puppet regimes in Eastern Europe. A farther milestone in European integration came in 1999 with the advent of a continent-wide currency, the euro. Today, the continent of Europe is finally at peace after over 1,000 years of war. Although the European Union is facing difficulties, these difficulties are being addressed through dialogue and cooperation rather than violence and war.
One must apply these lessons of the past to the present-day disdain Japan and Korea seem to have with each other. Both nations are heavily industrialized trading democracies in the same region who face some shared threats. Instead of having a dialogue to address these threats and work for a better future, it seems relations are never able to progress because of conflicts from the past. Japan committed horrific atrocities against Korea, as well as to America and many other countries.
However, what's important to remember is that the ones who did these terrible things are all dead. It is important to remember the past but not be beholden to it. There are too many issues facing the world today which require cooperation to solve. Global warming, nuclear proliferation, threats emanating from North Korea, and cyber terrorism, to name but a few. Korea should never forget the past, and it isn't required to trust Japan. But as neighboring nations, it is important that they work together to build a better future. If they can't cooperate and get along, then maybe Europe's destructive past will be Asia's future. Let's hope this isn't the case and that Korea and Japan can learn from the tragic history of Europe. Here are some questions I would like you to think about and prepare for a discussion in the next class. Thank you.